name's Benji and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today we're looking at Tiny Towns, a 1 to 6 player competitive abstract strategy game where you're trying to build shapes on a small board and then morph them into buildings. It also has elements of both city and pattern building because you need to take that finite space and make the most prosperous buildings that you can. So our setting is a tiny town full of cutesy little creatures and you play the mayor of said town and your job is to build your way to success. So let's see how this plays and whether this could be the next game for you. So the object of the game is for you to be the player with the most points once each player fills their board. You'll then need to randomly draw one of each building type, and the type can be seen in the top right hand corner of the card and place them accessible to everyone. You'll need to do similar with the resource tokens. Here we have glass, wheat, wood, brick and stone, and each building type as well. You'll then need to deal 2 monument cards to each player and give them a monument token. You'll then pick one of those monument cards. Now monument cards are special buildings that do similar to these regular ones in that they give special abilities and bonuses in terms of getting points. You'll then need to randomly decide who the first player will be and give that player the master builder token. You're then good to go. So the crux of the game is you need to be placing resources on your player board in the shape and configuration found on the cards in order to build that type of building. Now for illustrative purposes I've placed player 1's monument card face up, but that would be face down until that player is able to build the monument. So each turn the master builder is going to call out a resource, and that resource is then going to be taken by each player and placed on each player's board. So player 1 for example may wish to call out brick because they know that they want to ultimately build this cottage. And that will require either themselves or other players to select glass or wheat on a future turn. So once everyone's placed that type of resource on their player board, the master builder token is passed around to the player to the left, and that player does similarly. So luckily player 2 then selects glass, allowing player 1 to place their token there, and then helpfully player 3 selects wheat, allowing that shape and configuration found on the cottage card to be made. Now as soon as that takes place, that player can choose to build that building, so here a cottage, by replacing the resource tokens with the relevant building type. So here the cottage has a teal token. You take that token and place it on one of the spaces that you had a resource on. So play proceeds like that, round and round the table. Each time a monument is built, that token is placed on there, and any ongoing abilities or endgame scoring need to be referenced at the time that the monument is built. You'll also need to be cognizant of what each regular building will do for you in terms of gaining you points and giving you any further abilities. So as you can imagine, the more buildings you construct, the less room on the player board, because there's no way once either a resource has been placed for you to move that resource until you replace it with a building, or for you to remove a building on your player board. So you can imagine how much forward planning is required and how much strategy is required, knowing exactly where you need to place your resources and ultimately build your buildings. Now a quick note on the configuration and shape of each of these buildings. They can be mirrored, flipped or rotated in any way you desire, as long as the configuration remains the same. So for example, this chapel card here wants 2 glasses and 2 stone. You could put it in this orientation instead, and that would still allow you to build the chapel. The play goes round and round like that until you're unable to place any more resources or construct any buildings on your player board. If you're the first player to do that, you're out for the rest of the game, and any remaining players take turns between them being the master builder until they're in the same position where their whole player board is complete with either buildings or resources. We then proceed to end game scoring. Now each building type will contribute its own victory points towards your cause, and a couple of notes like this cottage card needs to be fed to be scored. Now other red building types generally feed your village, so you'll need to be wary of that synergy, because if you don't feed your teal buildings you won't score points for them. You'll also gain -1 point for every empty space on the board. Now at the end of the game you'll remove the resources from your player board and count up those empty spaces, giving you negative points accordingly. Now once you've got the sum total of all your victory points from buildings you've constructed and whatever your monument gives you, the player with the most points is then declared the winner. So that's how this game plays. What did I think of it? So who is this game for? Well, it's light to medium weight, and this is really kind of a next step into abstract strategy or puzzle type game. Now, this is one that's easy to learn but difficult to master, and I cannot emphasise that point enough. So I've seen it and heard this likened to the old video game Tetris. Now, when I recall back to my misspent youth, I was proud to say that I was once the reigning 3-time champion of that game, in my own house, in my own room. But I'm sad to say that skill set has not translated to tiny towns, because I'm hilariously bad at this one. Now you might want to consider this if you like Patchwork, published by Lookout Games and Mayfair Games, because that has that same sense of placing shapes on a board. Or Quadropolis, published by Days of Wonder, because that evokes that same sense of city building and needing to build things in the most optimal place. So in terms of gameplay, well, there's a lot to be admired about the design principles and ideas here, and they've been largely well executed. The idea of snaking out those resources into a shape on your board and then condensing them down into one space, it almost gives the illusion this is a fairly straightforward game. But suffice to say, when you start to get less and less space on your board, that's when it's going to become an absolute nightmare, knowing where to place and what resource to pick and in what order, and then where to condense the building. Honestly, towards the mid to late game, this is one that blew my mind. I just couldn't keep track of it all, and I've played this a few times now and I'm still struggling. So you are going to get your strategic and abstract puzzle type buzz out of this game, that's for absolute sure. Now, this is a game that feels like it was designed to be fast paced, and it does do that well. You pass the master builder around, it's fairly straightforward to pick. You will place your resources at the same time, but like I've said, it is going to start to slow down naturally as you get towards the late game. And it really does pay to be the last builder standing, because the more you can choose your own destiny, pick your own resources, the easier the game becomes. Now that's not to say that this is a game without flaws, but most of those are quality of life issues. Most notably, the board or the table can get a little bit messy. All the components are well made, but I would have just doled down the building types into smaller shapes and differentiated anything more notably by colour. And they really could have brought some containers in the box to make that even easier. Now the building or marketplace cards, I really would have liked to have seen the abilities shown or available at a glance to players on both sides of the table, because there's a lot to think about, there's a lot going on, especially later in the game, so having that information easier at a glance would have made things easier. Now, balance in all it's admirable that there's a load of building cards here and a number of monument cards here, and so balance is always going to be tricky. But I'm looking at this as almost a variety as the spice of life perspective, because you're all got communal building cards, so you're all in the same boat, and you're given more than one monument card at the start of the game to choose from, so any imbalances between the different types of building should be mitigated. You're all in the same boat. So in terms of the look and feel and theme of the game, well, everything's been well produced in the box, bar none. You know, I would have liked to have seen absolutely some ways of being able to organise the buildings and the resources a bit better, but the component quality is excellent. There isn't much in the way of theme, but it's an abstract puzzle type game, what would you expect? But the overall product, the box art and everything is well produced, the rules are well laid out, so they've just done everything very well there. So with all that being said, Dice vs Cards are going to give a final score to this excellent game of 8 out of 10. Now this isn't normally my type of game, but I found myself really enjoying the experience, and this is one I would absolutely recommend to you all. However, that's it from me. I'm going to go and spend some time trying to figure out how to get better at this game, and I will see you next time.